Today's story involves a man that wants to head out to the country, live by himself, completely alone, away from society. This case involves attempted murder, actual murder, and a manhunt that ends up in the death of this man and possible lost treasure. Welcome to Hidden Treasures. I hope you enjoy the story. On July 9th, 1931, a boat arrived in Fort McPherson, Northwest Territories, Canada. Constable Edgar Millen had the duty of questioning all of the guests as they arrived. By all reports, Constable Millen was a very likable and respected man in the community. Millen was a member of the Royal Mounted Police, which have the moniker the Mounties. They are known by their ceremonial red uniforms, brown hats, and always riding on horses. There was one particular guest on this boat that Constable Millen was having trouble getting information from. This man revealed that his name was Albert Johnson, but that was it. This man didn't have any identification, he didn't have any registration, nobody knew where he was from, nobody knew what his real name was, and he wasn't revealing any of this information. He did everything in his power simply to just not talk. Even though he was extremely difficult, he wasn't doing anything wrong, so Constable Millen just asked him the questions, the guy didn't answer, and then he went on his way. Millen did note that the man had a Scandinavian accent, and he also had plenty of money. So this man went around town spending this money. He bought all kinds of supplies and food, and he also paid a native Inuit to build him a raft for traveling down the river. Constable Millen didn't know it at the time. He thought that this was the only time he was ever going to see this man. Little did he know that this man was going to one day end his life. Albert Johnson hopped on his raft, gathered all of his supplies, and made his way to the Mackenzie River Delta, where he set up camp. Johnson built a small cabin on the Rat River, which is connected to the Mackenzie River, and this is where he decided that he was going to live out the rest of his life alone in the wilderness. It wasn't long before the local authorities started getting complaints about this man, Albert Johnson. The local natives were claiming that their traps were being sprung, they were being hung from trees, sometimes discarded, sometimes broken. This wasn't an unusual complaint at the time. This was during the Great Depression, and many men in the cities that didn't have any money or didn't have any food were traveling out into the wilderness to live off the land. The locals that lived out in the wilderness didn't like all of these people coming out and invading their territory, so sometimes they would make up false claims, so the authorities would hassle them and they would end up leaving. That may or may not have been the case in this situation, we'll never know, but what we do know is that Albert Johnson was trapping and he did not have a license to trap, so he was breaking the law. So the local authorities decided to investigate to find out if these were real charges, so they decided to go to Albert Johnson's camp, question him, and find out what was going on. So Constable King, another member of the Mounties, along with a native guide, traveled out to Johnson's cabin, which they knew he was inside. They could hear him rustling around, the fire was going, and they went up to the door, they knocked on the door, there was no answer, they knocked again and again and again, and they called to him, and Johnson, as he does, just completely ignored them. So King returned to Aklavik, and he got another member of the Mounties, a Constable McDowell, and they got a search warrant and went back out to Johnson's cabin. When they arrived at Johnson's cabin, it looked as it did before. It looked like Johnson was inside, and Constable King casually walked up to the door, knocked on the door, when he was struck immediately in the chest by a bullet fired from inside. He dropped to the ground, and everyone was completely surprised. No one expected this. Constable McDowell and the two Inuit guides ran up, grabbed King, drug him over to their toboggan, laid him on it, and they traveled back to Aklavik as fast as they possibly could, and they ended up saving King's life. He completely recovered from all of his injuries. But now it was very clear that they had a problem. Johnson, who was trapping without a license, was now an attempted murderer. Now that Johnson was attempted murderer, they had to go a little higher up the chain, and that was Constable Millen. Constable Millen was, of course, the man that interviewed Johnson at the beginning of the story. Constable McDowell formed a posse to go out and arrest Albert Johnson. The posse included McDowell, another Mountie named Eames, 3 trappers, 2 trackers, 42 dogs, and 20 pounds of dynamite. The posse met up with Millen along the way, and he joined the party. The men set up outside of Johnson's cabin, hidden away, and started just trying to talk him out of the cabin. As expected, this didn't work. Johnson completely ignored them, and none of them were about to go up to the cabin because they knew if they did, they were just going to get shot. So they decided to use the dynamite. That's what they brought it for, and they were going to blow up his cabin and make him come out. So they threw this dynamite on top of the cabin. The dynamite blew up, but it wasn't inside the cabin. It wasn't between any logs, so it just kind of blew up on top of it and didn't really damage this fairly well-made cabin. After several attempts, the dynamite actually collapsed in the top of the cabin, but not enough to do any damage inside or make Johnson decide to come out. Johnson started firing his rifle out at the Mounties, but they were well hidden away, so no one was actually hurt. But this started a 15-hour standoff in temperatures that were 40 below. After 15 hours in 40 below temperatures, the Mounties and the natives decided they needed to go back to Aklavik and regroup. After being delayed by a blizzard, the posse set out after Johnson's camp again on January 14th, and they arrived to find it completely abandoned. Johnson was gone, he had left, he had disappeared, but he was still wanted for murder, so they needed to find him. The posse caught up to Johnson 2 weeks later on January 30th, and they trapped him in a thicket and surrounded him, and a firefight broke out. During this firefight, Johnson ended up shooting Millen straight through the heart and killing him instantly. When this occurred, they came to the aid of Millen, and Johnson got away again. But it was very clear that Johnson was heading west, so they set up a blockade in the only 2 passes heading through the Richardson Mountains. This didn't stop Johnson. He scaled a 7,000-foot mountain and disappeared. They enlisted the help of a pilot named Wilford May. Wilford May flew around for 2 weeks before he finally spotted some tracks. The reason it was so difficult and took so long to find Johnson is because Johnson was traveling very intelligently. During the winter, caribou will travel along the frozen rivers. They do this to stay out of the woods so they can see up ahead and they can see if there are any predators. Johnson was following in the caribou path. This not only allowed Johnson to cover his footprints, but he was also traveling on packed down snow, so he didn't have to use his snowshoes, and this allowed him to travel very quickly. So he had traveled a much greater distance, so he was much further away than where they were initially looking. But at night, he would travel off of the river, and this is what the pilot May spotted was Johnson's tracks, not on the river, but traveling out of the river onto the bank. May alerted the posse of Johnson's location, and they quickly caught up to him. They caught up to Johnson traveling along the frozen river. As soon as Johnson saw them, he tried to get out, but the bank was steep, and he slid back down, not having his snowshoes. He was unable to get out of the frozen river, so he pulled out his rifle, he began firing at them, and they shot and they killed Johnson. When they examined the body, they found over $2,000 of American Canadian currency. They found a compass, a razor, a knife, fish hooks, nails, a dead squirrel, a dead bird, and his own teeth that he had removed that had gold fillings. Many people believe that this is only a small amount of wealth that Johnson had, and that he buried money and gold along the banks of the Eagle River and the Rat River. So if that's true, it's still out there today, and it's going to be really tough trying to find that. I hope you enjoyed the story today. If so, don't forget to like, leave comments, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.